Okay, so like Drew said, we're in a series called the B-Side, and it's all about the life of Joseph. And so if you've been here the past couple weeks, you know about Joseph, that he was sold into slavery by his brothers, and then he's sold into Egypt to a man named Potiphar. And he's in his household, and he's serving God well. And then Potiphar's wife takes notice of him because it says that he's handsome. And so she continually tries to get him to sin, and he continually resists. But then it says that she wrongfully accuses him of a crime, and so he's thrown into prison. And so today, that's kind of what I want to talk about, is this time in prison, which is Genesis 40, and this feeling of being forgotten, which I think a lot of us can relate to. So I was thinking about being forgotten, and I think the first thing that I thought of is something that we can all relate to. This is kind of like one of our greatest fears, this feeling of, what if I'm overlooked? What if the world forgets about me? What if everyone moves on without me? It all originates from being in the grocery store with your mom when you're younger. And you go, and you're looking for the Gushers, so you go and you walk off for like half a second, and then you turn around and she's gone. And for me, I always have this moment of like, what the heck? Like, what if my mom never remembers me? Like, what if I die an old woman in Walmart? And I feel like that's kind of where those feelings of being forgotten comes from. But in real life, I myself struggled with this a lot freshman year and into sophomore year of college. This feeling of, personally, I felt like God was calling me into ministry. I felt like God had placed this call in my life. And I got to college, and I did not feel any direction whatsoever from God. Like, I just kept every single day praying, God, what do you want me to major in? What do you want me to do with my life? Like, you're calling me to ministry, but that's a big word. Like, what does that actually mean? And so I went through this time of struggling of, God, are you actually calling me? Like, is this actually real? And just feeling like overall loneliness and struggling with, like, not necessarily feeling like Baylor was my home. And so, like, you can ask my roommate from freshman year, she's sitting right there, Hannah Braun. Probably like every single day after freshman year, I'd have like a handful of memorial cookies, and like a gentle tear would roll down my face. And I'd like scroll through the degree catalog, like, God, like, please, like, call out to me. If it's math, I'll major in math. But it like for sure wasn't because I dropped calculus. And so like there's just this time, I went through this time of like, God, like, what do you want from me? And I think that as college students, we can all relate to that. Like, we need answers. We want to know who our friends are. Like, please, like, just give me a friend group, God. Like, please just give me that. Like, that's all I want. Or like, God, just tell me what to major in. Tell me what to do for the rest of my life. We go through this season of, God, where are you? Like, where are my friends? Where are you in this time? And so, like I said, today's text is found in Genesis 40. And I think this is a passage that speaks directly to this issue. I mean, Joseph, better than anyone, knows what it's like to feel forgotten. His family has sold him into slavery. They're still living their life, but he's in prison. The people he just served so well in Potiphar's household threw him into prison. And so Joseph is just kind of waiting, and he's someone who's been following God his whole life, but now he's in prison. And that doesn't really seem to make sense to us. So if you'll turn with me, let's go to Genesis 39. We'll start in verse 20 and then go through chapter 40, verse 8, and then we'll finish the rest of it later. But it says, okay, so Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So we've already established that most of us can relate to this feeling of being forgotten. And later on in this passage, Joseph is literally forgotten. But for right now, I just kind of want to focus on this feeling of being forgotten. So what do we do when we're trying to follow God and we just don't feel like we have answers? We don't feel like anyone's remembering us. I think the first thing we can do is look and see what Joseph did in this passage to see what to do when we feel forgotten. So Joseph, as the scripture says, found favor in the eyes of the prison warden, and so he's put in charge of all the prisoners. And it says in verses 6 and 7, it says, let me look what it says, that they were dejected or downcast. And he said, why are your faces so sad today? And that may not seem that significant from first glance, but just remember Joseph's situation. He's put in charge of these people, so he's probably just supposed to make sure they stay alive, make sure they have food, make sure they have water. They're not dogs, so I didn't mean to say it like that. But just make sure that they stay alive. And yet it says that Joseph saw them. He saw that their faces were dejected, and he asked them, why are you so sad today? And it might just be me, but I feel like when we're in times of feeling forgotten or overlooked or lonely, we tend to have this really internal mindset. We focus more on, why is no one calling me or reaching out to me? Why is my situation this way? Why me? Why this? Why me? But that's not what Joseph does. He looks and he sees the prisoners alongside of him. I mean, he is going through an unfair situation. He, more than anyone, has the right to sulk and not care about anyone else. But it says he saw them. So the first thing we can learn from Joseph's time in prison is that when you feel forgotten, don't forget others. I think that's so important because having this mindset of caring about others helps to minister to yourself when you can look at someone and care about them more than you care about what you're going through. And it doesn't mean your situation's great, but having a mindset to look to others. And it doesn't just bless other people when you do that, it helps to bless you. Because that's how you make relationships. That's how you build those friendships you've been wanting, or whatever's going on, is to see other people. Jesus himself demonstrated this to us in Matthew 14, verses 11 through 14. John the Baptist, who was Jesus' cousin and his friend, was just imprisoned by Herod. And so he's in this prison, and Jesus, like I said, this is his friend. In this passage, well, let's just turn here. So it's Matthew 14, 11 through 14. So it says, his head, which is this John the Baptist, was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. When Jesus had heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. That's kind of amazing. Jesus just went through like a really hard thing. His friend just died, and so naturally he goes off alone to be alone and just to mourn. But it says when Jesus got to the other side, he saw the crowd and he had compassion on them. And Jesus, more than anyone, like I said, has a right to not care about anyone but himself. But what's really cool about this is right after this, Jesus goes on to perform the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, which if you've never heard of that, it's when Jesus takes a few loaves of bread and fish and feeds 5,000 people. And that's something that we as kids hear a lot, this amazing story, and it is amazing. We get to see God's power at work. But right before that, Jesus' friend just died. And so while Jesus didn't have to look outward, he did. The first thing we do when we feel forgotten is that we don't forget others. The next thing we can learn from Joseph's time in prison is found in verses 8 and 9. The men tell Joseph that they both had dreams, and there's no one to interpret them. So Joseph says to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Once again, this may not seem that significant at first glance, but in this moment, in this prison, Joseph is able to acknowledge God's abilities, not only to himself, but to other people. So when you feel forgotten, don't forget who God is. And once again, this is a theme I'm going to keep bringing up, is Joseph is in a prison. He's been following God his whole life. So if anyone has the right to question God's abilities to work, it's Joseph. And yet he still gives God the glory. And the next thing that happens, the third thing we can learn from Joseph about what to do when you feel forgotten, It's found in verses 9 through 19, which we'll read later, so I'm not going to read now. But basically, Joseph ends up interpreting their dreams, which is how ultimately he gets out of prison. And so the next thing we can learn from Joseph is that when you feel forgotten, don't forget to use the gifts that God has given you right now. I don't know if any in the box here, but you probably don't have the ability to interpret dreams like Joseph did. And if you can, that's amazing. You should use that gift. But you are all gifted by God in unique ways in order to advance His kingdom. And I think that a lot of times we tend to use our circumstances as this kind of excuse to not use our gifts at all. Like, I'm in prison. What's going to be good that comes out of this? But once again, Joseph helped these dejected, downcast men by using his gifts. Romans 12, 4 through 8 talks about how we all have these different gifts. And it says, where is it? For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. What I love about this passage is it doesn't say, if you're gifted, then serve me, then follow me. It says that every single one of us through Christ have been gifted. We don't have an excuse that, well, I'm not as gifted as that girl or that guy, and I'm in prison, sorry. It says that all of us are gifted. And I was thinking about specific people who've lived this out really well. And my friend Kylie Morse is really gifted in encouragement. And she's been someone who constantly, in a time whenever I've been doubting or whatever's been going on, she's continuously been someone to encourage me. And seeing her use that gift to not only encourage me, but everyone around her is just amazing to see. And then I thought of another person who's another CG leader, Madison McClendon, who is constantly the first person if someone's sick to go and help them and take them to the doctor, or if they need to be taken to the airport, she takes them there. And I'm just thinking about this idea of using the gifts that God has given you well, and I couldn't not think about them and feel convinced about my own life. What am I not doing that God has given to me, and what excuses am I making to not help other people with the gifts that God has given me? And so, before we go to our first discussion time, I just kind of want to sum it up. So the first thing that we do when we feel forgotten is we don't forget other people. And this allows us to see other people, to care about them. And even if our situation's hard and we're in this prison, to care about other people like Jesus did, like Joseph did. The next thing is to not forget who God is and His abilities. And then the last thing is to use the gifts that God has given you. And so while the temptation when we're in this season of feeling forgotten or overlooked is to do absolutely nothing but sit and sulk, we need to do these things. But one thing I want to say before we go to this discussion time is not that doing these things makes you more loved by God or makes you more safe than other people, but it puts you in a position to be used by God in other people's lives. And so if you want to go now, we're going to go to our first discussion time. There's going to be questions up on the screen. And I'll come up in 8 minutes. For your conversations, we're going to have another discussion time after this teaching time, so just, you'll finish it later. Okay, so before we talked about what do you do if you're feeling forgotten? If you're in this time of being lonely. But I think the natural question to ask, and one that I asked after thinking about this and praying about it, is what if we start doing all the things we just talked about and we still feel forgotten? And forgotten for a while. Let's turn right now to Genesis 40, and we're going to finish up reading 9 through 22, verses 9 through 22. So it says, So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand. just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put into dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. So if you kind of got lost because I just read a lot, and if you were like, and you looked away for a second, this is kind of what happened. So Joseph is talking to these guys, he's interpreting their dreams, and to one of them he says, "In 3 days you're going to die," which is really sad, and I feel really bad for this guy. But then to the other guy, he says, "In 3 days you're going to be restored to your position in Pharaoh's household. So when that happens, remember me, because I don't deserve to be in prison." And then it says that the cupbearer is restored to his position. And so there's this moment where we're all rejoicing. This is it. This is finally the moment where Joseph finally catches his big break. Like, he doesn't deserve to be in this prison. And finally, the cupbearer is restored to power. So obviously, Joseph is now getting out of prison. But if you read the next verse, go to verse 23. It says, "The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him." That kind of sucks. It just kind of sucks. Like, really? But I personally am kind of forgetful. And so I feel like maybe Joseph is like, "Hey, I get it, bud. You just lived. This is a big deal." So he probably is like, I'll give him a week of celebration time, party time. So he waits a week. And then Joseph waits another week. And then he waits a month. And then another month. And he kind of loses track of time because he's just been waiting for a long time. But then if you read the very next verse of the first chapter, if you want to look at chapter 41, it says, "When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream," which we later find out that then the cupbearer remembers Joseph. And he tells him, "Hey, I know a guy who can interpret dreams." And so then Joseph is taken out of prison. But in case you missed that, when 2 full years had passed, which is half of our college experience, Joseph's just waiting. He's been forgotten. That's a long time to be waiting. And here's the weirdest part about it. The first thing that we're told about Joseph's time in prison is that the Lord is with him. And another thing is that Joseph is doing all the right things, and yet 2 years he's forgotten. I might be the only one, but to me when I read this story, it seems pretty obvious that if the Lord is with Joseph, he wouldn't have to wait 2 years. He would just get out of prison immediately, because that's what we think seems fair. I don't know if y'all seen the meme, Karen with the bob, and she has 4 kids and she likes to speak to the manager. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, that's kind of when you want to pull a Karen. Be like, "I want to speak to the manager. This isn't fair. Joseph does not deserve to be here." But I wonder if you've ever been there, or you are there right now. You're still in this prison of feeling forgotten or overlooked, and things just never go well for you. Your life is struggle after struggle, just like Joseph. So maybe you've been angry, you've been sulking. It's not fair if this is my life. I shouldn't have to suffer like this. And maybe some of you feel like you've been forgotten by your friends, but even more, you feel like you've been forgotten by God. You feel like God should have moved in your life in some incredible way, and you feel like he hasn't. So maybe the first thing that you need to do is start doing the things we talked about in teaching time number 1. Those 3 things of helping to put ourselves in a position to be used by God. But how about those of you who are being faithful, and all along when I'm talking, you think, "Autumn, that's really great, but I have been doing that. I have been looking to others. I have been looking to God, and I have been using my gifts, but I'm still in this prison. I still feel forgotten. It still doesn't feel like my life is fair." I'm still looking for friends. I'm still looking for direction, whatever it may be. Maybe you were expecting a job to work out and it didn't. Or you wanted to get into sorority, fraternity, or grad school, or whatever it may be. Or maybe you had this boyfriend or girlfriend and you thought that they were the one. And so y'all end up breaking up. And everything, though, seemed to be pointing to this thing being God's will for your life. This is how he's going to do it. This is how he's going to move in my life. But then it just falls flat. And I don't know if you've been there, but Joseph has. You have one of those 2 years kind of later moments where this isn't necessarily how I thought that you should do this, God. So while it's easy during times like that to doubt that God is with us, and I'm sure that Joseph had some doubt during that time, we need to look at this story to remember that God is always working for us, even when it doesn't necessarily feel like the way that we think it should feel. I don't really know, like I was thinking about this, I don't really know why it had to be 2 years. Like I don't really know, and ultimately we don't get to know that, but that's kind of the way that it worked. And so lastly, when you feel forgotten, don't forget to trust that God is still working. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose." Sometimes it's kind of hard to see when we're in the midst of our loneliness or struggle or whatever it may be. And some people may be going through a lot more than just loneliness, which loneliness is hard. But I don't know what your situation is. And I know that in the middle of it, it's really hard to see that God can be working good. But just notice it doesn't say that everything that happens to us is good, or that God causes all these bad things to happen to us, but that God will bring good out of every situation if we are committed to him. And I think that God gives us this story in the life of Joseph to remind us that he's always at work for our good. And not just when we're working for Pharaoh and helping to save Egypt, or when we're the favorite son, but even when we are a slave in Potiphar's house and when we're in prison, God is still working for our good. And I know, kind of thinking about myself, I know that I've fallen in the trap of viewing college in general sometimes as this kind of waiting period, or this prison of, like, I can't wait till I graduate, when I don't have homework and I have my life together, then I'll start living out my call of my life, and then God will use me. When my conditions get better, and I have no homework, all this stuff, then God will use me. But I think that we as people need to stop viewing this time of waiting or prison as this time where God can't move and God will never work good out of it. Because the Bible says that God will work good out of this. So like I said, the last thing, when we feel forgotten, don't forget to trust that God is working. And then lastly, before we go into our discussion time, I just want to make one comment that in a time when everyone in his life forgot about him, when Joseph's friends and his family forgot about him, God did not forget about him. And in our lives, when we feel like it's struggle after struggle, and God's probably forgotten about us, and our friends don't care about us, and whatever it may be, God has never and will never forget you. So you gotta go to your next